Development Manager with Corporate Solutions here at Red River College Polytechnic. I want to thank you all for joining us here today for this very exciting announcement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the lands that we are on today, and that RSC Polytechnic's commitment to Indigenous peoples and communities have become part of our foundational statements that define RSC Polytech. RSC Polytech campuses are located on the lands of Anishinaabe, Innuak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We recognize and honor Treaty 3 Territory Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, the source of Winnipeg's clean drinking water, and we acknowledge the treaty territories, which provide us with the electricity that we use both in our personal and professional lives. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. RSC Polytech is committed to a renewed relationship and dialogue with Indigenous peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, and reciprocity. I am truly honored to stand before you today and take part in an announcement that is empowering and strengthening our communities as we collectively work towards ending gender-based violence. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by the Honourable Marcy Ian, the Minister responsible for Women and Gender Equality and Youth for the Government of Canada, the Honourable Minister Nahani Fontaine, the Minister of Families, the Minister responsible for Women and Gender Equality, and the Minister responsible for Accessibility for the Government of Manitoba, and Dr. Christine Watson, Vice President of Academics for Red River College Polytechnic. And we are also joined in the audience by the incredible organizations and agencies that continue to support our community and those impacted by gender-based violence. I'd like to also acknowledge all those watching our program via live stream. To start today's announcement, I would like to invite to the podium Honourable Marcy Ian, Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth, to provide remarks.
It's wonderful to be with you here today, Georgette. Thank you so much, Dr. Watson. I was commenting when I walked in how beautiful it is. It is gorgeous, and the circles. I could see the circles. I thought, those are intentional. So it is beautiful to be here. Thank you for the land acknowledgement. It is a privilege to be on these lands. And Nahani, it's great to be with you, Minister Fontaine. We are, of course, in Winnipeg Centre, so my colleague, MP Leah Gazan, is here. Thank you for being here, Leah. And thanks to everybody else that has joined us here today. So time flies. It was a little more than a year ago that we announced a bilateral agreement on the implementation of the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence. Manitoba was the first province to sign on. Since that day, 13 provinces and territories support this plan, are committed to this plan, working towards meaningful gender equality. So this is now year 2 of this 10-year National Action Plan to end gender-based violence, where we are addressing the means of support for victims, survivors, meeting them where they are, which is so important, whether that is housing, whether it's program support, whether it's childcare, whether it's organizational funding, meeting them where they are. What does that mean for gender equality? What does meaningful gender equality equate to? What does it mean to fill the gaps, the chasms that exist when it comes to underserved communities, when it comes to providing a platform for those whose experiences have not been heard, frankly, have not been at the forefront of this work? Gender-based violence is one of the most pervasive, deadly, deeply rooted human rights violations of our time. It disproportionately impacts women and girls, certain populations that are at risk of GBV, of course include Indigenous women and girls, just under 5% of the population, but 21%, because I need to add that percent, 21% of those impacted by gender-based violence, intimate partner violence. Members of the 2S LGBTQI+ community, another underserved population, disproportionately impacted, people with disabilities, people living in northern, rural, and remote communities. These communities are overrepresented. The data shows it, and I don't need to run through all of that data now, but it shows it year after year. It's estimated that every year, the federal, provincial, and territorial governments in Canada spend billions in healthcare, justice, social system responses to gender-based violence. To what end? This is why the work of amazing organizations, places of learning like this one are so very important. You know what it is to do holistic work, intentional work, culturally sensitive work, rehabilitative work. It means that you are championing and literally saving the lives of so many. You may not realize that, but you are. So thank you. Ce qui m'amène à la raison pour laquelle nous sommes ici, the reason why we're here. As we continue to work towards gender equality across Canada, I want to make sure that we're conscious of the innovative approaches toward addressing this. Things that are happening across the country. People are working tirelessly and seamlessly with Women and Gender Equality and Youth Canada to make possible support for Canadians, possible for provinces and territories, of course, including Manitoba. And I'm looking forward to continuing this fight for true gender equality. And of course, this fight can't be done alone. This is a partnership. This is a plan in which provinces and territories cost share. And not just cost share, but we collaborate, we talk. What's working, what's not working, how can we move forward? I told Minister Fontaine-Nahanni that it was a pleasure to be with here today. And I truly mean that, because in her work, this is the work of somebody who's walked a walk, who is and has been on a journey. And all of that informs the work that you do. And that's really important, because when you've been in certain places and experienced certain things, you know what it means to lead with empathy and perseverance and passion like no other. And it is my honor now, Minister, to pass the mic to you as you come to address this special day.
Okay, well, Anine, and welcome everybody. So first and foremost, miigwech to Minister Ian, Minister responsible for Women and Gender Equity and Youth, to jointly announce funding for the second year of Manitoba's implementation of the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, also known as GBV NAP. Gender violence, as the Minister has previously noted, impacts on all of us. As a province and as a country and as a territory, we must work together to end gender-based violence and create a safer future for girls, women, and gender diverse citizens. That's why today I'm so very excited to announce Manitoba will be receiving over $6 million in funding from Canada to support 19 community initiatives working towards ending gender-based violence and supporting survivors. This funding from the Government of Canada will augment the $20 million Manitoba currently provides to agencies through our gender-based violence program to support survivors, but also to prevent violence from happening in the first place, which is a narrative that I think we really need to lean into. A lot of the work that we do is downstream. It's in response to. We need to do the work upstream to prevent violence against women, girls, and two-spirited folks and gender diverse folks. This bilateral agreement with Canada and the projects that it supports shows that Manitoba is listening to our community organizations, which I love so very much, and I appreciate so very deeply the work that folks do. I, like Minister Ian, have heard about the life-changing work that folks are doing across Manitoba and certainly across the country to address gender-based violence. And that's why our approach in Manitoba is to provide funding directly to community agencies. Our community partners, our relatives, are the experts on the ground day in and day out. And they know what's best and where the resources are needed. We're proud to build on some of the successes from the first year of funding. You'll hear about some of those initiatives very soon, including something that I think is just extraordinary, the micro-credential program for shelter workers. We'll have that right away in a little minute. Miigwech to Dr. Watson and Georgette for joining us here today to share some of this, and also for hosting us. I see our community partners there for hosting us in this beautiful space. As I've said many times, I've hosted a couple of things here now. This space is an act of reconciliation. And so I'm so glad when we're able to be here. So I thank you for welcoming us here. So many of our initiatives focus on communities that are disproportionately impacted on gender-based violence, including, of course, Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse folks, citizens that are living with disabilities, folks of color, newcomer and refugee, and LGBTQ2S peoples. I want to just share ever so briefly, I have a bunch here, but I'm just going to say some of the initiatives that we're supporting in year 2. 600,000 to Gani Ganitsiks Walking with Our Relatives program, $50,000 to sex workers have access to resources equitably or share, $200,000 to Thrive Community Support Circles mental health program, $100,000 to Brandon's Women's Resource Centers, community-based sexual assault services, $502,000 to the North Point Douglas Women's Center, $100,000 to the Paw Family Resource Center, $200,000 to the Newcomer Men's GBV program through Elmwood Community Resource Center, $450,000 to Clan Mothers Healing Village or / Knowledge Center, $235,000 to Blue Thunderbird Family Care, $166,000 to the Norwest Men's Relationship Program. That's just to name a few of the amazing programs that we are partnering with and we are funding and leaning into the good work that they're doing. And I want to, at this moment, just say again, my profound gratitude for the work that you all do. It is sacred work, it is heart work, and I'm so honored and privileged to work alongside you in this work. I'm also, I already said that, okay. I'm also grateful, I just want to say to our WAGE team. I know that every opportunity that I have, I always acknowledge our WAGE team, and I want to give a particular shout out to Jamie Carnegie, who was our executive director for the Women's for WAGE Manitoba, and under her leadership have guided year 1, and we've had some pretty incredible conversations on year 2, and alongside our special advisor on Indigenous women's issues and our whole team. I think year 2 really reflects the priorities of our government to end gender-based violence, the partnership with Canada, and then that sacred relationship that we have with all of the folks that are on the ground doing this work day in and day out. And so I say miigwech to our team at WAGE for the incredible work that you're doing. I want to just acknowledge my sister colleague, Leah Gazan, MP, for her work that she does on this end. It's always a pleasure to be in the same space with you, and I just want to acknowledge you. I'm so very pleased to welcome up Dr. Christine Watson, Vice President Academic at Red River College Polytechnic, to say a few words.
Thank you, Minister. Ani, bonjour, Tansei, bonjour, welcome to RRC Polytech. My name is Dr. Christine Watson. As I've been introduced, I am Vice President Academic here at RRC Polytech, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to Manitowabi Bidaziye. Manitoba Bijazige was a name that was gifted to us by our elders, and it means where the Creator sits and brings light. And I do believe that the investments that are being announced today bring light to so many. They bring light to those who are fleeing violence. They bring light to communities. They bring light to those who are helping others who are seeking refuge. And so I think it's very fitting that we are in the roundhouse, sitting in circle together today as organizations and educational institutions, as levels of government who are committed to this work. It's also not surprising, I suppose, that all of the speakers today are women and women of color, except for me. And I think it's really important that we see leadership from those who are underrepresented in our communities. And I want to acknowledge MP Leah Gazan, who has sat on the RRC Polytech Board of Governors, Minister Fontaine, Minister Ian, because it's a result of their leadership of the people in this community, that we can do the work as an educational institution. We are very pleased to be a partner in the gender-based violence initiative in this community. We provide RRC Polytech's shelter support worker micro-credential, which Georgette leads and supports on our behalf. And I want to acknowledge the instructors and the staff who put it on every year. We're very pleased that last year we graduated 23 students from the shelter support worker micro-credential, and in a month from today, we're graduating another 19. This micro-credential program prepares shelter support workers to meet those who are fleeing violence in the very moment when they arrive. And they walk the journey together with those most vulnerable in their darkest times. We have the responsibility as an educational institution to ensure that those shelter support workers are prepared, that they understand the role that they are taking on, and that they are also protected. It is not easy work. I have the greatest gratitude and they are so inspiring to think about in that very moment when someone needs you the most, that we can help prepare people who are working in the shelters to welcome and bring hope in that moment and all the way through the journey. We built this program alongside Manitoba Association of Women's Shelters, as well as other organizations who do this work most closely, so that it was actually the people doing the work that informed the education. It should always be thus. And they are provided with sector-specific skills and training, and we are constantly hearing back from our students to make sure that what we are presenting into the community is actually what the community needs. Last year, we had one of our graduates talk to us. His name was Stephen, and he was actually in the shelter system. He had benefited from being in shelters, and he chose to leverage his lived experience by becoming a shelter worker and to give back. He's very successful, he's doing very well, and it just goes to show the full circle of how when you give a hand to help and someone receives that gift of support, that they then have an opportunity to give back into the same circle. We're very honored to be sharing today the announcement of the funding from Canada to Manitoba in honor of those who are on this journey together, education, governments, and community organizations. This funding will ensure that our micro-credential prepares shelter support workers to access this training tuition-free for as long as they are needed, and so that the training is accessible so we can continue this very, very important work and make a difference in our communities. Miigwech, Ekose, merci, marcy, and thank you for being with us today. And I'll turn it back to Georgette to close us out.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. As well, thank you, Mr. Ian and Minister Fontaine, for your dedication to support and uplift survivors of gender-based violence. Preventing gender-based violence is critical to protecting and enhancing the lives of all women and gender-diverse folks across Manitoba and Canada. Thank you all for attending today and for the work you do in addressing gender-based violence. Your work plays a pivotal role in educating, preventing gender-based violence, and ensuring those impacted by this violence have their voices heard. I would like to now open the floor and invite Minister Fontaine and Minister Ian back up and open the floor to questions from the media.
Great question, Miigwech, for that. I'm going to look at Dana, and Dana is the executive director at Blue Thunderbird, and they do extraordinary work at supporting families where they're at every day, day in and day out. They feed people, they feed children, they have a grandmother's program that if you need, I'm a mom, I'm a single mom, I need a couple of hours because I have some errands, I can drop my baby off with you. Or alternatively, you know what, like every other parent, I need a weekend to myself or I need a night to myself. These amazing women will watch those children, and what they do is they help mitigate children coming into care. Right? For years and years, if you're an Indigenous woman, you are at risk of having your children apprehended because maybe you don't necessarily have the supports or the community or family supports that you need. And here's these amazing matriarchs that are on the ground day in and day out that are supporting families and keeping families together. And that came out of the need and discussion from families and from community. Like, here's the supports that we need. I look at Elmwood and the good work that they're doing there in respect of working with men and newcomer men to talk about gender-based violence. I just named only a couple of the programs that we're supporting, but a significant amount of the programs and initiatives that we're supporting are working with men. And I know that my colleague, Minister Ian, would agree that it is male violence when we talk about gender-based violence that put women, girls, and gender diverse folk at risk. And so we need to be tackling that. But that also comes from the community and those discussions.
For both ministers, if they can answer. I'm just wondering, going into year 2 of this action plan, how did year 1 go, and did you see anything that you implemented, bring down the gender-based violence, or did you bring anything from last year into this year's plan?
Do you want to talk about our national?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. The amazing thing, and I do believe it's amazing thing about this plan, is that every province and territory is different. And so every province and territory was able to see through the organizations and others that Minister Fontaine mentioned, grassroots organizations, what they needed. What was needed here in Manitoba is not the same as what was needed in Ontario or Nunavut. Or Saskatchewan. And so they are all tailored to community, tailored to province. So lessons learned, yes, many, and I can see them. All of the plans for provinces and territories are on our website, our WAGE website. And so we can see exactly what is happening. There are a couple of tenets that had to be followed, and it's important to mention that. Prevention, as the minister talked about. At least 50% of every plan Every province and territory had to address prevention. And then, of course, it was those that are disproportionately impacted, underserved communities. So in following those tenets, different plans came about. And so many lessons have been learned, but those lessons are rooted in community. Those lessons are rooted in grassroots. You know, what are you seeing on the ground? And so it continues to change and evolve because it's people-based.
And what I'll add to that in respect of your question, and we'll talk about the micro credentials program, which was such a success on being able to support the program. So if you are wanting to become a shelter support worker, we will pay for everything. You have the support, you can do it online. Do you need a computer? We'll pay for the computer. We'll pay for, bus tickets, whatever you need. And a lot of folks don't necessarily know that right now, and again, I'm assuming that this is the same across Canada based on some of the discussions that I've had. But here in Manitoba, the infrastructure to be able to support shelters, women's shelters, unsheltered traditional homeless shelters, transitional shelters, those that are on the front lines, there's a shortage of workers. And so a lot of agencies and organizations are looking for folks to work there. And so here's a perfect example of marrying government support, bilateral government support, marrying the needs in the community and passing and graduating individuals that will then go into that system and help support it. And so much so that we decided to do it for a second year to be able to lean into that and support those folks that want to do that really good and, again, sacred work. And I just, let me say this, I don't want to take too much time here. I just want to say this. These dollars that Canada committed to over the next 4 years, they are transformative in the work of tackling gender-based violence, because in some respects it's been like, here's some dollars for this, here's some dollars for this, but here are dedicated dollars, and like the minister is saying, that can be earmarked and unique to your particular province. But we know that it's ongoing, so you can build up that support and start to see the fruits of that labor in tackling and ending gender-based violence.
If I might add just one more thing, and thank you so much, Minister, because as I was listening to Dr. Watson share Stephen's story, I thought about the people that are working on the ground in said organizations. Most of them are women. Most of them are. And that is not an easy job. It is not the kind of job that, you leave at the front door when you go home every evening. You take it with you. And it's a job where, support is needed, and this plan helps with that. There are many provinces that are not only looking at, victims and those that need to be served, they're looking at who is serving and how to help, most of whom are women. So I wanted to add that too. You're getting fancy today.
I know.
You may need to remind us, but
I know you might.
I guess entering the second year of the program, where have we seen the greatest strides forward, and what areas need a little bit more attention and care?
I'm going to the attention and care first. So there was an article written probably about a year ago, and it struck me because it's true, and the minister alluded to this today. Men and boys in prevention. Women, by and large, aren't hurting themselves. Women, by and large, are the people working, the people that are being hurt and need support, and addressing prevention, and particularly with men and boys, is really important. Much more work has to be done. And these are difficult conversations for some people. They are. It's not lost on me that, the tables that we sit in are mostly 99.9% of the time occupied by women. But if we're really going to solve this, if we're really going to end it, and we use that word end for a reason because that's the goal, then we have to, not just include, but fully engage, meaning at the table with us, men and boys. So while that work is being done, that would be the part where I want to see a lot more, and I want to see a lot more engagement.
And I think just to answer a little bit of your question, one of the things that's I've become acutely aware of, I'm, more so now as minister responsible for that safety net within the province. And I think that my former ED would agree with me. The women's shelters were based on a principle and a formula from the 80s. Right? I just finished meeting with some of our executive directors from some of our shelters, and things have changed, right? So one of the things that I'm engaging in as minister is I'm going to be hosting a roundtable to bring all of the folks at the table to see, how do we, for a lack of a better word, and I don't particularly like this word, but how do we modernize and work together in respect of providing those safety supports for women and their children? And one of the gaps that we see day in and day out in the work that we're doing and our wage staff is that we don't have enough transitional housing. Right? So you have a shelter, an immediate response, and even at that, sometimes it's very difficult to get in. Like you need a shelter right now. A lot of times, almost all of the time, our shelters are full. And so, but let's say you get in, you're there for, a month to 3 months, but then shelters are put in a position where there's no transitional housing for them. A lot of women, particularly Indigenous women, in many respects, they can't go back to their communities, or there's not the support in their communities. So one of the discussions that we're having with my team is transitional housing, which I think is something that wasn't necessarily contemplated in the 80s and 90s, but certainly we become aware is fundamental to that infrastructure for immediate safety.
How many organizations outside of Winnipeg can expect funding through year 2?
A lot, but I don't have those numbers. I will ask one of my staff to follow up. We have that list for you, for sure. Any other questions? Wonderful. Miigwech for coming. Thank you so much.